Hi, and welcome back to the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. I'm your host, Dan Hayden. This podcast is for dads like you and me, pursuing a faith-filled, legacy-building journey as we lead our families. If you're new here, take a moment to follow the show and check out the past episodes. We've been working our way through the 3 pillars of mental fitness, but today we tackle something that ties them all together, the sage perspective. Today's episode is all about learning to see life through the eyes of your sage, your spirit-led, wise, and deeply faithful self. In Positive Intelligence and in Scripture, we are reminded that we don't have to be prisoners of our circumstances. We can choose our perspective. God has given us authority to command our thoughts and our emotions. This is foundational because how you see determines how you lead. As always, let's get practical. Maybe you're listening on the drive home after a long day, and you're just bracing yourself for whatever chaos or difficulty might wait for you once you open that door. Or maybe you're catching this episode early, before your house wakes up, hoping to start your day with more purpose and less reactivity. I want to begin this episode with a question. Have you ever noticed how 2 people can go through the very same hardship, and one grows deeper in faith, while the other grows bitter, discouraged, or withdrawn? What is the difference? Often, it's not the details, it's perspective. The sage perspective is the foundational belief, backed by both faith and neuroscience, that every situation can be turned into a gift or an opportunity. That's not wishful thinking. It's the practice of searching, sometimes digging deep, for the seed of growth, connection, or possibility, even in difficulty. Let's take this into Scripture for a second. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 tells us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." James in chapter 1 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." These truths don't mean we ignore pain or pretend everything's all good. It means we look for God's work in and through every season. Let me share a personal story. A few years ago, as I was getting ready to retire from the Army, I thought I was all lined up for the absolute job that I was being told every retiring lieutenant colonel should be getting. I was even told by the recruiter, expect a call with an offer next week. Guess what? That call didn't come for another 3 weeks. And that call was not the call I wanted. It was the dreaded, "Hey, sorry, we went with someone else" type of call. This was about a week away from my official retirement date. We were staring at my paycheck getting cut in half. But as we all know, God provides. And 2 months later, the roof was still there, kids were still fed, rent was still getting paid, bills were still good. And at this time, I leaned on my faith and these mental fitness tools to find that sage perspective. What is the opportunity here? Because guess what? Now I'm a stay-at-home dad. Now I'm the one who has to do all the laundry, but I'm also the one who gets to bring my kids to school. I'm also the one who gets to pick them up from school. I would constantly ask myself, how is God using this to draw us closer as a family? I already had those answers. But getting there wasn't instant. It meant pausing continuously, talking with my wife, praying, what good could possibly come of this? I realized the real opportunity wasn't about the money. It wasn't about a lack of employment. It was about modeling faith in uncertainty for our kids. It was about modeling teamwork within my marriage. It was about walking the walk we always preach to our kids. Our kids watched us meet stress with prayer and honest conversation instead of panic or blame. That was the gift. We never hid any of this from our kids, and we had very open conversation throughout this period of our lives. So why does perspective matter so much for Christian dads? Because your perspective fuels either wisdom or worry, connection or control. If your perspective is, I need to fix every problem, you'll step into every moment with anxiety, intensity, or withdrawal. But if your perspective is, God is present in this, and there's something to learn or build here, you lead with peace, openness, and trust. Let's look at biblical leadership. Joseph spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, but his sage perspective reframed those years as preparation for greater service. David spent years in the wilderness running from Saul, learning reliance and character. And of course, Jesus looked at the cross, a moment of agony and apparent defeat, and saw in faith the joy and redemption set before him. Bringing it closer to home, consider the small, everyday inconveniences. A child's meltdown after a long day. A spouse's criticism when you're already feeling stretched thin. Maybe it's a work setback that triggers your self-doubt. Seen from a saboteur mindset, these are hassles, failures, even threats. Seen from the sage perspective, each is a discipleship moment, a chance to lean into patience, humility, creativity, or connection. If you've followed these last few episodes, you know there are 5 sage powers: empathize, explore, innovate, navigate, and activate. The sage perspective is the lens through which you access all 5. Empathize. When your child is disrespectful or your wife is short, the sage perspective says, what's really going on? What pain or need or fear is underneath this? Suddenly, you're not just annoyed. You're curious and compassionate. Explore. When routines break down or plans fall apart, the sage perspective says, hey, let's get curious. What could work better? What haven't we tried? Innovate. When the old approaches aren't working, the sage perspective looks for new solutions inspired by a mindset that every challenge contains a lesson or an opportunity, even if it requires vulnerability or risk. Navigate. Especially on hard days, your sage perspective grounds your values. What story do I want to tell later? What matters most for my legacy, not just my comfort right now? Activate. Finally, with a sage perspective, you take action, not out of fear or urgency, but with grounded confidence and hope. Let me illustrate with a coaching story. I worked with a dad whose son was really struggling in school. Every bad grade felt like proof of failure, until he started looking for the gift. Deeper conversations with his son, opportunities to teach perseverance, even chances to pray together specifically about challenges. The problem became a catalyst for a stronger relationship. Now let's talk about how to actually practice this, because good intentions aren't enough. Our brains, if left untrained, will default to negativity and blame. It's survival wiring, but the sage perspective can become a habit. Here's a simple step-by-step framework you can use. And guess what? All of this is going to sound familiar. Step 1, pause. When you notice frustration, stress, or a negative story running in your mind, pause. Take a breath. Interrupt your saboteur script. I tell this story all the time to my clients. I'm in charge of getting my 9-year-old and my 12-year-old out the door for school. And we're generally running late most days. And instead of stressing, I just breathe. On one particular day, we were running kind of late. It's easy for my controller saboteur to take charge and start barking out orders. I told my son, hey, bud, we got to get socks and shoes on. And he's like, hold on, Dad, I got to do one last thing. Trust me, every kid out there has to do one last thing whenever you have to get out the door. Well, his one last thing He wanted to see if his Crocs, would fit the dog. So instead of going into saboteur mode, I closed my eyes, I paused, I took a breath. By the time I opened my eyes, he realized that Crocs don't fit the dog, and he was already halfway out the door. Okay, step 2. Name your saboteur. Ask yourself, who's narrating this moment? Is it my judge? My controller? Just noticing whose voice is center stage brings you back to self-awareness. Step 3. You guessed it. Do a PQ rep. Redirect your focus. Rub your fingers together. Feel your breath. Say a breath prayer. Lord, show me what you see here. This calms the reactive brain and opens the door for wisdom. Step 4. Ask the sage question. Where is the gift? Literally ask, what's the possible gift or opportunity in this? How could this moment make me more grounded, more loving, more like Christ? Even if you don't see an answer yet, asking changes the atmosphere. Just asking the question helps you go from resignation, rooted in fear, to acceptance, rooted in your sage brain. Okay, last and final step. Take one sage action. Maybe it's apologizing. Maybe it's asking a thoughtful question or brainstorming a new approach. Maybe it's just simply sitting in silence with a loved one. The sage perspective is about doing the next wise thing, not the perfect thing. Okay, let's get super practical now. Here are a few real-life scenarios you'll likely face this week. Ask yourself, how would my sage perspective reframe this? You get home, dinner's burned, kids are fighting, and your wife is already frustrated. What's the gift here? Is there a moment to model patience and flexibility? To call the family into laughter and teamwork? Next scenario. Your teenager slams the door after an argument. What's the gift? Is this an invitation to empathize, to pursue them later, or to reflect on your own approach? Last scenario. You receive tough feedback at work. What's the gift? Is this a moment to practice humility, seek growth, or become more resilient? Your coach's challenge for this week. Pick one daily inconvenience or stressor, and in that moment, walk through the 5-step sage perspective process. Then that night, journal. What happened? What did my saboteur voice say? How did I pause and shift? What new gift, opportunity, or insight did I see? And how did this experience shape my family's atmosphere or my sense of peace? I mentioned this in the last episode. Another great journaling prompt for us as Christian dads. Where today did you see evidence of God bringing good out of challenge? How did practicing sage perspective change your response, even if only a little? Fathers, here's why this work matters. Your children are watching not just what you say, but how you see. Your sage perspective will shape their own. Are you modeling a faith that only works when things go right, or a faith that finds meaning, peace, and growth right in the middle of the mess? The world does not train us to see this way. Saboteurs say, you're failing. The sage says, no, God is still at work here. Let's look for him together, right here, right now. That's the legacy that's worth building. As you practice the sage perspective, you'll notice not only more resilience in yourself, but more openness in your family. You'll notice less rigidity and more grace. Less control, more trust. Your home becomes a training ground for a faith that can withstand anything. If what you heard today resonates, share this episode with another dad who needs hope. If you want to go deeper, check the show notes for my Positive Legacy Academy and the upcoming masterclass on family rituals that transmit faith. Before you head out, let me ask, what is one challenge in your life right now that could use a sage reframe? What might be the gift, even if you can't see it yet? Try out the steps we discussed. Journal your experience. And let's see together how the Sage perspective transformed not just your outlook, but your legacy. As always, stay rooted in grace, stay open to God's gifts, and keep building your legacy one fresh perspective at a time. Talk to you soon.